So they asked me to give a talk at the end of my time at NIH. And at that time, Professor Mayo was the chief of neurosurgery there. This was before I got involved in neurosurgery. But I gave his talk, and I was really impressed. He actually came and listened to it. He came up after, and we chatted for a few minutes, and I realized what a warm and creative person he was. And unfortunately, that was before I was really involved in neurosurgery, so I didn't really partake of his excellence. But he was my first contact with Pakistani neurosurgeons. That was many decades ago. But in the upper right, you see a picture that was taken in Mumbai, a luncheon that I have to thank Nazmina Ashraf as the Pakistani neurosurgeon I met there. He gave a really nice talk, and so we had lunch together. And I was very fortunate a little bit later to have a long discussion with Professor Iftikhar Ali Raja, fortunately before he had his untimely passing with an airplane accident. And lower down you see another lunch in Lahore many years ago with many of the people who you're familiar with, the people in that luncheon. So it's been a real pleasure to be here quite frequently over the last 15 years in many different locations in Pakistan. So we'll move on. We're going to talk about the macro end of, if you want to call it traumatic brain injury, but just neurosurgical problems in general. The United Nations has the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. We're only, barely 7+ years away from that. And if you look at the bottom, the graph there of the conditions that require high-quality health systems, for the top 6, and you see in there cardiovascular disease, neonatal death, road injuries, and cancer, require surgery for diagnosis and treatment. So many of you have read this Lancet Commission on Global Surgery, came out in 2015. 1/3 of all deaths worldwide are due to lack of surgery. That's more than 4 times the deaths due to AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. So they're really documented we have a need for surgery. You're not persuaded by the humanitarian argument. The loss in gross domestic product globally is rapidly approaching $1 trillion a year due to injury and neoplasm not being adequately treated. Again, surgery is needed. And Walt Johnson, who was the lead for emergency and essential surgical care at WHO a few years ago, they calculated that if we don't spend the money now to improve surgery globally, we'll spend 20 times as much because of the increased disability. So it's an investment, not a cost, and we have to look at surgery as that way. If you look at the upper right, where the arrows are, just earthquakes alone in many years caused more than 200,000 deaths a year. So if you add all of the natural disasters, there's many hundreds of thousands of deaths, enormous economic costs. And then there's also what we call unnatural or man-made disasters, terrorism, warfare, infrastructure accidents, transportation accidents. So upwards of probably 500,000 people die a year of trauma-related episodes. And one example was in a Haiti earthquake. 20,000 people died each day, the first few days, because it was just a lack of basic surgery. Orthopedics, neurosurgery, treat conditions that were survivable, but they just weren't available. And so they recognized more than a decade, or roughly a decade ago, that we really need to have robust systems locally. We can't depend on people coming from the outside in an emergency. And if you look at the bottom, a paper just came out in the last couple of weeks in the Lancet. We need to strengthen the elective surgical systems throughout the world if we're going to see real improvement in healthcare. Many years ago, we were thinking, why don't we take these mass casualties can actually bring people together. They may not normally work together. We'll come together in an emergency like the floods in Pakistan. The world was trying to respond and help that. So those are events that can be levered to increase surgical resources. We know that trauma and stroke centers work, and they're totally integrated into the healthcare system, everything from prevention to medical education and certification. Why don't we take that model? And it's been proven, as you see here in the upper one, trauma patients, if they're taken to a non-trauma centers, 30% increase in mortality. In Finland, they showed if you go have a stroke and go to a general hospital rather than a stroke center, you're much less likely to be alive at a year or be living at home rather than an institution. And so these mass casualty centers are basically, if you want to call it a trauma stroke center on steroids. I won't go through all the resources that are helpful there, but when you have the ability to do surgery. You have radiology, intensive care. You can take care of things like complicated childbirth, many conditions that require the facilities we need for surgery, but may not be directly surgical. One of the main points we've been working on is combining the military and civilian resources for healthcare. Many places, the military resources are underutilized except during times of conflict. And so you address many of the public health issues just by strengthening the surgical system. And even Hippocrates noted millennia ago, he who wishes to be a surgeon must first go to war. Really, the military is a key to advancing surgical resources in many countries. They've been trying in the US for decades to bring together civilian and military systems. And if you look at the upper right there, those circles, 1/10 of global GDP is spent on violence. That's twice what we spend on the Sustainable Development Goals and 10 times what we spend on meeting the Paris Climate Agreement. It's a huge problem. And in the US, and it's probably true in Pakistan as well, in the bottom right, you see roughly, if you're under age 50, roughly half of people die of trauma, rather than other conditions are more common in the elderly. And in the map of the US, the red is where you have a high incidence of trauma deaths, and the blue is where you're within 1 hour of a trauma center. You have a car accident in Manhattan, in New York City, you'll be in a trauma center in 5 minutes. If it happens in Wyoming or Utah states, they're very large with very few medical facilities, it may be 5 or 10 hours, so clearly the survival rate is different. The crises may destroy earthquakes, floods, as you had, can destroy your hospital facilities as well. So you really need robust systems, and you really need to bring everything, and one essential element in this is telemedicine. Some of the things we need, as you know now, and we saw yesterday at the workshop, there are mobile CTs already available, but some of these are becoming very light. One is about 200 kilograms and runs off a 110 volt power supply, and also will run on batteries. So these are very helpful for emergency situations. Stroke ER on wheels. A couple of studies last year, both showed, as you see in the bottom, on modified Rankin scale, these mobile stroke centers really do save lives. And you can imagine not only having these taken to a disaster site, these mobile operating rooms, but having a mobile clinic for day-to-day care, taking a limited resource, but moving it around maybe once a week, would go to a specific area and perform imaging, ultrasound, CT, etc. Telemedicine. For example, Rifat Latifi and his colleagues have, for a number of countries, but Albania being one here that was published in World Neurosurgery, telemedicine allowed them to transfer the images to the only neurosurgery center in Tirana in the whole country, and that reduced the number of transfers, saved so much money it more than paid for the system itself. And they've also used this for disaster response in NATO, again, providing these excellent telemedicine services. One of the technologies that's really we're all familiar with are the drones that have very high resolution, not only visual imaging, but also thermal imaging. And you may think you need high-tech drones, but you can actually use high-tech cockroaches, as this engineer in Singapore has done. He put on a warmth detector, movement detectors, and exhaled CO2 detectors on a cockroach and send them into collapsed buildings to allow you to determine where there might be somebody still alive. We underuse our smartphones as far as the capabilities. Can you imagine if every bus driver, motorcycle rider had a smartphone that would immediately notify the emergency room when there was an accident, just by the accelerometers and the GPS systems in there. And for example, in Kenya, they're using smartphones to enhance pre- and postnatal care and getting women who may have a difficult childbirth to a hospital in a timely fashion. And in the UK, this Good Sam has combined the use of drones to deliver defibrillators for people who may have a heart attack, and combine that with the use of smartphones as well. So really a lot of creative use of technology. So what we envisage for mass casualty situations, you have this gentleman in the bottom left. He's got smart glasses. He's getting constantly updated from these drones of the situation, and he can direct the resources to the appropriate places to optimize the response. And our smartphones with deep learning and AI, they're getting close to the point now of, COVID's been a big problem. you can, if you have enough people who cough into their smartphone, you can record that, analyze those signals, and determine this is a COVID cough and not due to bronchitis or something else. That's on the horizon very soon. And I want to make note of our colleague Tariq Khan in Peshawar, what he's done. I was there for their opening of the Northwest General Hospital in 2009, and that view in the bottom right is looking north, and that white in the distance is this tent city of all the refugees from the Swat Valley at that time. And this is what Tariq has done, and I think one thing that's key there, the first thing he did when he came back from Ireland in his training is he spent time educating the community about the need to prevent neurotrauma. So that was what he was doing in the 1990s, and he got together with some of his physician friends, raised the funds to build Northwest General Hospital. And since then it's just snowballed. He's gotten a second hospital, opened a school of nursing, school of medicine. I think he's graduating 100 doctors a year now, started an ambulance service. Just amazing what you can do with a little bit of dedication and ingenuity and being able to work with your colleagues. Don't just think about neurosurgery. Think about your colleagues in surgery, your nursing colleagues. Get all those people together and then work with the healthcare administrators and the ministries of health. And so I would invite you for next March to come to the first WFNS Global Neurosurgery Conference. It's going to be in Peshawar. Well, to go back to our project, we had two locations that we were kind of pushing this notion of bringing everybody together. One was in northern Chile, in Iquique, and the second was in Peshawar. Sergio Aguilera, a neurosurgeon in trauma in Iquique, brought together not only the Air Force people, there's an Air Force base there, the local hospital people, the Ministry of Health, as well as this ONEMI, which Chile has an actual Ministry of Emergency Response. Brought all those people together to try to coordinate their resources, and we met a year and a half later in the chief of the main hospital for the military, to try to get them, since they were underutilized, to work together with a civilian. We also met with the head of the Army in Peshawar just before COVID, again with the goal of let's integrate those resources. There's great resources in the military. Let's take advantage of them in the civilian sector, which is underserved. Pakistan is really standing out as being the first non-Sub-Saharan African nation to take on the NSOAP program, this National Surgical Obstetric and Anesthesia Plan of the WHO. If you look on the right column, I'll read through that, that's all the targets for 2030 that some of the Sub-Saharan African nations are taking on, and Pakistan as well. And so hopefully we have these goals. How do you get there? And we think that using the mass casualty center concept and bringing all these people together can do that. In the interest of time, I won't read through all that, but you can take a minute and just scan through there. The real key is integrating not only with your surgical colleagues, anesthesia, nursing, getting the hospital administrators to realize that we're not just talking about neurosurgery, we're talking about healthcare in general and using surgery as a leverage to get there. And we just a couple of publications we've had recently. You'll see many of these. Most of these authors are not neurosurgeons. There's some administrators there, nursing people. And so I think that's where how you make progress is looking beyond neurosurgery itself and working with our colleagues. There's a chapter that just came out in the book on global neurosurgery on this mass casualty response concept. And with that, I'll conclude. You can see Tariq Khan there. Leonidas Quintana in Chile has been also very active in this with his family. And in the lower right, you see myself and Sergio Aguilera. And in the lower left, obviously, the opening of Tariq's first hospital in Peshawar. And thank you.